the stuff. That's much better. We're going to be the stuff. Welcome. All right. Have a seat.
The stuff. 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 The stuff.
Gotta have it. The stuff.
Video rolling. And then you go, the stuff, part 1, take 1.
All right.
Yep. Perfect.
All right. I clearly was not.
It's alright. The cloud was a little surprising.
I was.
Like the universe just kind of sneaks in. Tells you it's time.
All right.
This is the stuff. My name is Elaina.
I'm Shamika.
And we have a guest with us today.
I am Tara.
And this episode of The Stuff is very special. I say that every time. But this time I'm for real. Because there's so many things happening in this room besides the pizza in my mouth that you don't even know. Okay? We have all kinds of equipment. I feel very watched right now because we're using an actual camera. There's lights. There's a camera person. Hey, Anna. How you doing? You look great, by the way. So, tonight's episode is full of all kinds of amazing things. So keep watching. Or right now, you know what we gotta do. It's time for my favorite song. The stuff, the stuff, the stuff, the stuff, the stuff, the stuff, the stuff. The stuff, the stuff, the stuff, the stuff, the stuff. Gotta have it. The stuff.
You know, we sing it in a different key each time.
You don't know what key you're
harmony
gonna do.
changes.
I never learned how to harmonize. I pretend. Because I always wanted to be on SWV, you know, or one of these girl groups with me and my cousins. And none of us could actually harmonize.
Yeah.
But we all thought we could. It was good times.
For some reason in church, I like trying to sing the really difficult harmony part, and then I'm like,
You set yourself up for that, you know? I don't
Probably.
sing. I try not to.
You're so funny.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, I have a deep voice, or I can, and so I'm always trying to be like, yeah, I actually can sing very deeply, because Tony Braxton made it cool when I was a kid to be that alto in the choir. So I take advantage of that when I can. And then when a Mariah song comes on, I pretend that I'm a soprano.
her voice is crazy though.
Right.
Like, yeah, because it's like 5 octaves plus, which is amazing.
And
Like-
she sustained it this whole time.
Well,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
I heard about what had happened at the tree lighting. I mean, I wasn't there, but
Wait, was that an alcohol incident or was that a food ritual incident? Because those are two separate things.
Oh, you know what?
And I love Mariah, so that's not.
I do too.
You know,
Mariah, baby, we asked you before. We still believe you can do it. Like keep it on.
Isn't she in Vegas now? Isn't she still in Vegas?
I didn't know she was, but I do know that last year when they had the big tree lighting thing in Rockefeller Center, she was there. I did not hear very good things about what had happened while she was there. But it was also the night where like half the city was trying to burn the tree down anyway because of what had happened. So it made sense in the scheme of the evening to me.
That she would not be at the bar.
Mm-hmm.
So you were telling me how this whole thing started.
Oh yes.
I need to hear the origin story of this
Such
get
good stuff.
together
Yes.
that we recorded.
So this all started because of a business class at Columbia.
Okay.
And that shout out of the episode goes to Guthrie. So Guthrie sends out this Facebook post. It's like, hey y'all, there's this like business class that I really want to take in January intercession. All I saw was technology something. And I was on it. I was like, what, where, when, how can I get down? And then he was like, I just need a couple other people to be in this group. We have to come up with a business plan, and then you go to this class. part of this week-long intensive was interviewing, like, we had to interview at least 10 people a day.
Wow.
And part of the interview process was about our concept for our business, which was a whole thing about trying to get resources to the church who wanted to digitize their liturgy. So we were gonna, at one point, have a platform, and another point, we were gonna like give people materials that changed, of course, throughout the week. But I came to Elaina, so I was asking different seminarians about what they thought about technology, what they thought about the role of technology in the church, and these sorts of things. Now, me being the uber student that I am, I recorded all of my interviews because I didn't know if I was going to go back, I don't know. And I told people when I was interviewing them that I was recording them. And then I was like, Elaina, you're here. Do you mind, like, if we get together?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is awesome that she said yes, because there were so many people in this class that were just like, I think some of them made up their names, but they were like sitting out in front of stores, trying to ask people and all this other stuff. So thankfully I had people that just lived down the street or down the hall for me to ask. And we talked for like almost an hour for a 15-minute interview. It started off with,
I don't even know what, like, I know we talked about church a lot, just like in general, because I think we used the questions as a launching pad.
truth.
So we talked about technology and like, what does it mean? What does anything mean? That, you know, like what's the liturgy? What's the technology? What does it mean to compile something and like digitize it? And then from there, I think we just started telling stories.
Yeah.
And then we were like, oh, we should do this. Should we? Okay, we should tell stories to each other. So
Yes. Yes. And what was great about it was a 15-minute thing. I was like, it's only going to take 15 minutes, maybe 20. And I had other things later that evening. By the time we were done talking, I was bumping up against my other meetings. I was like, okay, I have to stop because I have to go to this other thing. Now when we were like, we can't stop. We need to find a way to keep this going. At the time, we were like, okay, what time works for you? What time? Because scheduling things was ridiculous with people. But we were like, okay, Monday morning, nothing's going on yet.
yeah.
Remember that?
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
We don't meet on Monday mornings no more.
No.
That happened twice.
So the stuff is like an ongoing conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like our designated, we're gonna hang out during this time and have a conversation. And sometimes other people are gonna come with us.
Exactly.
Sometimes they won't.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes don't.
Thank you. I watched television in the night.
It took me a second. I was like, I know what that is.
My brain does it all day long because I have jingles and commercials and TV shows and movies and stuff just floating in my head. So whenever anything even remotely comes close, my brain goes there.
I haven't had a TV since I was like 18, and I haven't watched a lot of movies, and I didn't have internet for like the last 4 or 5 years. So I'm really behind on things that like most people talk about in casual conversation. Because most people are like, so did you see whatever? And then you talk about it, and like that's how you get to know someone. And all of some, you know, like,
True.
have you seen this? Have you watched this? Have you gone to this place? So like, I don't know.
Is it odd for you then to be recording this if you're not?
No.
Because you're on the internet right now.
Well,
Yeah.
and but so like I have internet here. Like I'm not like I hate the internet or anything, but like I just didn't, I guess like consume social media for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's weird to have like a gap in my head between childhood and then like the last 6 months, and just have this set of years that's not there that other people have as like common knowledge. It's just like not there.
So how did you entertain yourself?
Play music, went to the library, talk to people, hang out with people, like
What we did before.
yeah.
But you raised a good point about how we get to know each other through the media we consume.
Right.
So, like, there's certain, I was talking to a friend of mine recently about shows I like to watch.
Ooh.
And where we had areas of connection and where we didn't. At one point, I was like, I'm not sure if we should be friends if you like that show.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
And it doesn't be that dramatic, but
Sometimes.
it's almost like a test to see, like, okay, wait a second.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting lately, I'm not a big TV consumer, but once I came back to school, I definitely, you know, I guess to have balance, if I'm so intense with the books and the intellectual, I need to watch stuff that's going to help me relax. And I don't want to think that hard about it.
Yeah.
But lately, there have been programs that have been so good with the storyline that I've been moved to tears, or I've been like really affected, and it reminded me about what good television has been like. But there was a story in NPR recently I was listening to about Mad Men ending. Do you guys watch?
I don't, because you know I wait until the show is done, because I'm not
binge.
trying to wait for the episodes.
You're gonna
I don't play that
binge.
game anymore.
You binge.
I surely do. My time is coming. No spoilers. So it's ending.
Well, I was just thinking, to your point, it's now become a national conversation when certain series are over.
Yes.
Like, and to be part of that national conversation, if you haven't watched Batman, you're kind of missing out on a national
Breaking Bad
conversation.
and
Same thing.
Or MASH.
Same thing.
I mean, I think MASH was, I don't know TV history as well as maybe other people, but I feel like MASH was one of these times where the entire nation had been watching this thing and suddenly it ended and people were like, snaps.
But see, that's weird to me. Like, maybe that's why I don't watch TV, because I'm like, shouldn't we have these feelings about other stuff? Like, and not to say that TV is not art, because I do think it can be. And I'm not saying that, like, it can't tell stories and it's powerful, whatever. But when we fall apart and we have these conversations, right, about the show, but not about other art, or like not about other events. And so maybe I would watch TV if I felt like it wasn't going to take over my life, and then I went into other things.
But
is that personal?
I would also say people can galvanize around a television show because the entry cost is so low. If you are someone who consumes the opera and you consume what some people cast as finer arts or higher art or high-end art, then that's a different cadre of people.
Right.
You raise a really good point, because again, on NPR, so I consume a lot of radio.
Okay.
Nice.
And NPR is actually making that same, or I think maybe it was BBC, one of the two, were making the same type of assessment, which is about the accessibility of art.
Right.
So if we consider art in and of itself to be the acting, and it happens to be through a media, like a modality of television versus the theater, then who has access to the theater versus who has access to the TV? And the reason why I thought about that is because the conversation was about how high quality TV has become. So we're not talking about like, you know, stuff that reputedly will make your brain go soft, but stuff that perhaps is a little more complex, that it's actually considered, you know, I won't say high art to the degree, but certainly such quality programming that, you know, you can trade off not going to theater if you're going to watch a really good sitcom, a really good drama.
Yes.
Right. I guess, so for me, when I didn't have a TV, it was also a financial thing. So like I couldn't afford a TV or like to go to movies or to have the internet. So I guess when I say participating in art, I'm thinking about like people making art themselves, not so much like, oh, everybody should go to the opera or whatever.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And so, but like, so how does that work for a group of people? And like, how does that change conversation? So like, if you watch the TV show, but then you also, I don't know, go play music with your neighbor, does that change how you are able to process the TV show and then use it? Or, and vice versa? Like, is there something, do you get more when you do both? I guess is what I'm asking.
That's an interesting question. I guess for me, I think about the fact that I've never been a big TV fan. I was actually raised on a very, very, very stingy diet of television. So growing up, I was allowed to watch like 1 or 2 shows on PBS, and a treat was the Cosby Show on Thursday nights. I'm probably dating myself at this point. But
on forever, you're fine.
But what's interesting about what you're saying is I think what I've observed with technology is that TV doesn't seem to be so remote. So instead of our reliance on television to entertain, I now what I think is happening is I look at TV, we look at TV as a society as a way to inspire. So I see a show and then I go make a show, you know?
Right.
So YouTube is flooded with shows.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a show, and I don't know
Right.
if conceptually we would have done that smarter. I mean, you might have certainly, because you didn't have TV and you're thinking about how to create, but I think even people didn't consider themselves to be creative types are now maybe looking at a television show and say, well, 1 second, I can get on and have my own channel.
Yes, people like Jody Saray, we've mentioned her before on this show. She went to school at my alma mater in Stanford, and she was one of these people who was a creative type, and she did not see her own sort of narratives being told in mainstream media. So she went to places like YouTube. She created Awkward Black Girl. She now has a production
you were
company.
saying that.
Yeah, and so there's other people who are also realizing that just because their narrative, their stories aren't being told doesn't mean they cannot consume them. Because we've become a culture that instead of just consuming, we also create. And I would also say we've been talking about TV and television where it is on its last leg. We all know that. And right now we're really talking about just shows because they're being produced. They're being produced for Netflix. Like it's happened now, right? You know, Tina Fey. I just finally saw the episode of the new show that Tina Fey is doing. What's it called, Hannah?
It's called Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt's.
Thank you, go. There, yes, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. And this is a show that ABC was going to do. And they were like, it doesn't really match our lineup, so they sold it to Netflix. And now you'll have a show that maybe they'll start on TV, but they're definitely streaming their episodes if they know what's good for them somewhere. Or there's shows that just start on Netflix or they start on Amazon Prime. And people have completely changed the way that they consume their media. Like we mentioned before, binging is a thing that people do now. And then also the caliber of TV shows, as you mentioned before, has increased where you're taking people who are going for movies in the past because movies are not as cool as they used to be and the scripts aren't as good as they were before, whatever the case. Now the scripts are in television, quote unquote, or these sort of smaller screen kinds of productions. And a company like Netflix who has all these algorithms and technology behind what people like, what people are watching, whatever, they were able to craft something like House of Cards out of that algorithm because they knew what kind of director people wanted, what kind of actor people wanted, what kind of show, like all of these different things were figured out. And then they created this blockbuster because they knew exactly what people would look for.
And then, and now I'm thinking just to add some balance to the conversation about Elena's point, if we still believe in the adage that art imitates life, do you think we're sacrificing living, quote unquote, for being the viewer? Even though we're still creating through that lens, do you think that we're not living enough?
I think where I get stuck is, are we living and creating for gaze? So like we can have this sort of thing where, on the one hand, access to telling your story and making your story is increased, which is always good.
Yes.
But I'm thinking about a couple of years ago where it felt like everybody in the entire world was writing a biography because everybody was like, oh, my story's important. I want to cash in on it. And that's very different from like authentically telling your story in a way that resonates with you, which is not for everybody to write a biography. It's very unlikely that everybody should write a biography. Not because some lives are worth more than others, but because some lives manifest in different ways. And so if you feel a biography, that doesn't mean that everybody must feel a biography, right? And so I think this thing can apply to TV. Like somebody might, or to an episode or a recording or whatever. That might be true for one person, and then somebody else should write their biography, and then somebody else should maybe, do a dance or do something else, create a thing that manifests their being, But that can't be about the profit or about what do you want to see from me, as much as it has to be what am I compelled to stay into that resonates with my being, and then shares it. You know what I mean? Like shares that the value that's innate in everybody in the unique way.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, companies are doing exactly what you're talking about in that they picked up on what the kids are doing. And they're like, let's get a hashtag on it.
Right.
Let's have a YouTube contest. Let's XYZ. And since companies are people now.
Well, they actually have always been.
Now they can legally, right.
That's a very old ruling.
So Like they're taking on these different ways in which people are actually living through these arts, and they're going back behind them and like copying or trying to manufacture them, and it feels very doctored. It feels very forced, handheld. It's always great when a company tries to use social media and it fails gloriously, because it's hilarious. Like when, I have two examples, both of them have to do with hashtags. One of them is the police department. It was like, show us how you, what was it? Show us how you relate to the community, like the police in your community or something. There's a hashtag for it. So people did. They showed police brutality. They showed the police doing ridiculous things. Hashtag cops care, or whatever it was.
Wow.
Like, yes, and that was ridiculous. And then there's another one about, there's so many, but there was another one about a company that came out with a hashtag right around MLK Day, and they were honoring Rosa Parks, someone very safe. But they said something like, we're so glad that hashtag racism ended, or something like that. So it's like,
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
Is that the case?
And it's interesting. So you two are raising two things I'm thinking about. One is, and I've been thinking a lot about it, particularly on this notion of how do we commodify our stories, and that, on the one hand, everyone has a voice, and I think there's a collective societal agreement that everyone has a voice and wants to be heard. But what's our motivation for being heard, which is one about the commodification. Also, does every story need to be heard by everybody, which is another thing. What's sort of I don't know if there always has to be a purpose to a story, but I think about whatever we define, categorize, the textures and nuances around story and storytelling is really being reinvented in many ways. And there's some pushback around what that means. So, for example, I wasn't a private person, but I find that the stories I want to publicize and stories I want to keep private become even more important for me in this particular time and place, in terms of what I want to put out there and what I don't want to put out there as a story. So that's one thing. The second thing I was thinking about when you were speaking, Shamika, about the hashtag piece is corporate America recognizing that there's a new language that's now in place, right? Yeah. So this hashtag stuff, all the social media related lexicon, there's a language that's in place that, depending on what generation you are in, that is what you're in tune to just have a dialogue, right? So like the platform for social discourse, the new entry is social media parlance. And what do you do if you're corporate America and you want to get the ear? Or what do you do if you don't want to participate in that, but you want your story told? Like, things have become quite complexified. I've been thinking sort of about like, where am I on this? What are the textures like? Do I need to learn this new language to be heard? All that kind of good stuff. Yeah.
And there's a lot of different platforms. They're constantly changing, which is the nature of when you're in the cutting edge, of something like technology.
Right.
There are thousands of apps, tens of thousands
it's
of them,
flooded.
new made every day. And then the social platforms that exist, because this is my theory of how the young people move through technology and how like corporate America is chasing them. So like when you first had the cell phone, you gave your kid a cell phone, they were always using the minutes, because it was, however many minutes you had a month. So then the kids realized we just text each other.
Right.
Then it was 20 cents a text, then it was 10 cents a text. And then they realized you can get an app to communicate without texting.
Right.
And then suddenly like all this revenue that like banking, like these phone companies were banking on, just drops. And they're like, what the L train? Oh my God. And so now they're scrambling, so the money's in data. And like not forcing, but the way that they've structured data, depending on the cell phone company, they'll charge you more if you use more, they'll slow you down if you get to a certain amount of data. It's really difficult to have unlimited data. Like there's 2 plans left.
I still have an unlimited data plan.
Boom! It's gonna be
But it's because I've had it grandfathered in since 2000, 1998, something crazy like that. Well, that means I'm completely limited to like that one company, right?
Yeah.
Your point is valid.
But yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
No, I was thinking, because you initially started talking about theology and spirituality, I'm just thinking about, where do we see spirituality now, and then in light of all the stuff that we're talking about, right? Storytelling and language and media or not being part of television, like creating art. What do you guys think? And the corporatization of spirituality in many ways. For example, mindfulness, which is now like packaged in yoga studios, and completely divorced from their Hindu origins, completely divorced from like Buddhist origins. So like, what do you guys think?
I think it's very easy because things have been commodified to, and so things have been commodified, and the agency that people have with their spiritual practices has shifted from the church or a religion to themselves.
Right.
So you can like cherry pick, you can get a panache of this, smattering of that, and you concoct your own collection or experience in some cases. And it's become increasingly like the largest growing community of religious individuals are the spiritually, yes, the nuns, the non-affiliated but spiritually seeking individuals. And their experience is one that is growing outside of what the strictures have been for the past hundreds and hundreds of years. So now it's become this thing where, what do we do when you can do whatever it is you're wanting to do, like, and you're trying to figure it out?
I'm thinking, I'm trying to, I gotta like line it up. It's not totally lined up here.
Yeah. See, I can hear Elena's thoughts bubbling, so that's why I can talk. I can talk about whatever for however long.
Well, I've been thinking and so interrupt, please, if you've got it.
So, because I'm thinking about what you just said, and that's kind of the right now. But I'm also thinking about testimony, because when I think about what does it mean to make authentic art, or to live authentically, or whatever, it's always in my mind linked to testimony, and like telling the story that way, which is to say that when it's your time to tell your story, then you get up and you tell your story. And if it's not your time, or not your day, or you don't have your feeling, then you wait. And spiritually, using that same principle for all things. So like sometimes you go to church and you're just at church, and you don't have to get up and tell the testimony. Right? Sometimes you do, and like being able to discern the difference. And so my question, I guess, like I'm concerned about whether or not we take the time anymore to discern the difference
Between, I want to make sure I'm clear.
between like whether you feel a legitimate impetus to speak, or whether you're just doing it because you want to, and then like using that same principle for art. But then, what does that mean for like how we interact as spiritual beings with each other and with God? So like you can go to church and like know like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do and perform it, or you can go to church and be authentic about how you feel in that moment. And I think to me there's a connection, I guess, between like testimony as action, testimony as metaphor, and then art as being. Like those things are kind of the same for me.
I think I've been thinking a couple of things. One is this notion of the binging that we're used to doing now and consuming our entertainment. How much of that translates into our approach to spirituality? I probably identify as a spiritual non-religious person, and where do I have binging tendencies around my approach to spirituality? I think is something really interesting to think about. The other thing I think is that I think it's very important in any spiritual journey to be able to be still, kind of hear your voice, hear what makes sense to you, but even more so when you're without a structure. And when there's such overload of information and data, because we have an obsession with knowing, right? And that's how we manage our anxieties. We need to know. And it's just that now there's so much, it's so easy to know.
Yes.
How do I cultivate some kind of practice to be still enough to know that, no, this is the spiritual path that works for me, this is not the spiritual path that works for me. And where do we carve out space for that? So when I think about technology and spirituality, or even your point about the differences in testimony, its impact on art, which still requires some sort of discernment, and we need to speak and not. You can't you can't escape the stilling process to know that. And
Right.
I'm wondering where that counter is, and I think it becomes all the more important, the more flooded cerebral cortex gets with all this information, the more I need to figure out how to be still enough to navigate my way
Yes.
so that I'm still doing what's right for me.
So let us have a moment of stillness.
Sounds like a plan.